Thanks for joining us this week on Email Geeks at Home Drinking Coffee. Join your hosts Chris Marriott and Paul Schreiner each week as they talk email marketing, life, purpose, faith, but mainly email marketing. If you're looking for some normalcy in these crazy times, you've come to the right place.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Email Geeks at Home Drinking Coffee. I'm here with my friend Chris Marriott.
Great to be here with my friend Paul Schreiner.
Great show today. Really looking forward to sharing it. There is we're facing some weather issues across the country. Chris is facing some sick issues across the episode. So it'll be we're going to kind of do our very best here with everything going on, but really excited about the episode. I think it'll be a good one to share.
Yep. Number what in the Founders series? Number 4?
Something like that. It's been really good to get to know people in the industry a little bit better. And I don't know that we'll do this forever, but certainly right now, I'm really engaged. And kind of that's the measuring stick I've been using is like, am I excited about this? Because that's what it comes down to.
We're all glad Paul's excited. But let me ask you this, Paul. Are our sponsors excited?
Chris, our sponsors are so excited. And I can talk to you specifically about Audience Point and the new product list fit that we have going on. Anytime I'm staying up all night, a couple of days in a row, because I'm like writing code, we have some really cool things on the horizon, excited to share. Honestly, the momentum that we're building, looking at the impact we've had for marketers, which is really the measuring stick I'd like to use is, are we making marketers' lives better? Yeah, we sure are. And that's really a cool thing. Love to tell folks about if they want to reach out. I guess sales@audiencepoint.com. Ask for Paul. No, ask for David Inman.
Ask for David Inman. Well, that's great, Paul. And also we're sponsored by our good friends at Email Connect, who are there to help you with all of your RFP needs for your next ESP.
Yeah, well, and that's no small undertaking, getting a new ESP and riddled with pain and challenges. And so having a shepherd that's been down that path, I can only imagine, a seasoned veteran like yourself is like, it's like pulling Tom Brady in to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and winning the Super Bowl.
Well, no lamb shall be left behind. See what I did there?
With that, let's launch the show.
Yeah, let's get to the program.
Today we have with us, as our guest, Samantha Iodice. I'm sure I'm butchering her name. That's one of those things I should have said. Am I pronouncing this correctly? She's a longtime email marketer, currently serving as founder consultant at the Sauce Experience. You will be drawn to the word sauce, like I am, and then you will see that your brand value has increased at the same time. I mean, marketing, right?
You kind of glossed over that butchering of the pronunciation, which I believe is Iodice.
Ooh, he's got extra bonus points on you, Paul.
And honestly, he should.
Yeah, I usually just give the Americanized. Well, it's not really. There's two ways to say it in Italian. We usually say Iodice. Certainly easier for me to describe because there's Yoda in it, and I'm a big Yoda fan. But Iodice is also the other way to say it. So that's like extra bonus points.
Well, I'm embarrassed. I've brought shame upon my family.
That's nothing new for your family, though.
They're accustomed.
Samantha has served on numerous committees in numerous capacities, worked at numerous companies in numerous roles, from both brand side to vendor, and has really seen the industry from sort of soup to nuts, start to finish. Finish is probably not the right word, but fits absolutely into this sort of season that we're having, where we kind of talk about a little bit capturing the history of our industry a little bit, because if we don't, it's going to go away. And so having the chance to kind of kick up our heels a little bit on a snow day we're all facing and talk through our industry, I think is kind of a cool thing. So welcome, Samantha. Glad to have you on board.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to nerd out with you guys.
Great to have you here. Yep. And as a refugee, I know from the Chicago area, you're now, I believe, down in Texas, but the snow followed you, apparently.
It did this year. Yes. It has not been this cold. Why? I think it's been at least 20 years since it's even been this cold here. So everyone's losing their mind. And then depending on where you are, it's 1 to 5 inches of snow. So they're really losing their mind. There's no infrastructure for it. So
Right.
yeah, the world is like shut down just about.
But you're the only one who knows how to drive. So you're out on the road, but you have to be careful of everyone else who's out on the road who
That's the thing.
doesn't know how to drive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I spent
Well,
the week
Texas is
at the boyfriend's, and since I left, he's out of power. He had power the entire time I was there. But I had to drive back, which was about an hour. And people. But I got here.
Now it's pretty flat in Texas though, where you are, is it not?
Yes.
Which has got to help, even when people don't know how to drive in snow. Like, just point your wheels straight, give lots of room to stop.
Well, the roads here like to curve a lot, and there'll be those little rises, just periodically.
Yeah.
And that's when it gets interesting. But it's not too bad.
Got it. Yeah. Well, I get it. We have a little bit of snow here in Tennessee, not much. Chris, what's it like down there in Alabama?
It's actually, I was supposed to be back in Chicago for this broadcast, but because of the weather, I have not been able to, that's been ripping through the middle of the country right in my drive path. We've delayed our return until tomorrow or later this week. But Alabama, it's in the 20s. I mean, I'm wearing a sweatshirt. I'm indoors. So, fans of the show will, yeah, I mean, our heat exchange heating system, could barely keep the house at 60 because it was so cold outside. So
when you're pulling heat out of the air, that does make sense. Well, and I can't help but think this is Mother Nature's effort to keep you in Alabama, Chris. I mean, there's no other.
Out of Chicago.
It's worked so far.
Samantha, I see you're drinking something. As part of our show, we always talk about what we're drinking, where it came from, all the things. So tell us about what you're drinking.
Well, first I'm drinking out of a mug from my niece, which shows a horse and then a unicorn on a stripper pole, saying this is regular ants and this is me. And I asked my niece, I'm like, should I be concerned it's a stripper pole? She's like, nah, it's just Flash.
Just Flash.
Just Flash. But I am drinking a lemon green tea that is decaffeinated because I do not need to be caffeinated.
Oh.
I went the opposite direction. I made mocha pot coffee, which is overly caffeinated. And I thought, when we do afternoon recordings, it's just a gift that I get to drink the coffee in the afternoon.
So bonus.
Bonus.
I'd be wide awake for like way too long. The aging thing, it's a problem.
Yeah.
It makes me angry with things that are happening in my life.
Yeah.
But,
Marriott, what are you drinking today?
Well, sadly, I went into the kitchen to refill my coffee mug with Santo Domingo coffee. But as Paul pointed out, it's the afternoon, pot was empty. So I've switched over to ugly sparkling water from our guest, Ugly Hugh, back
Ugly
in season
Hugh
2.
owes you so much.
I've never even heard of it. Now I have to find it.
It's the best.
It's pretty good. And he was a guest on our show. Absolutely fantastic guy. And really, I think, trying to do some cool, amazing things there. So
that's awesome.
And Chris fell in love with the Ugly Waters and has really done a fantastic job being a brand
I
visionary for them.
I subscribe to them. I get a couple of cases every month, period, delivered to wherever I am.
Oh, I'm going to use a sticky note for that so I don't forget.
Ugly flavored sparkling water.
Well, I'd like to start, and there's so much we can cover today, and we don't really have a roadmap. But let's start with what you're doing recently, the sauce experience. I made our family's Italian sauce last night, which I'm embarrassed that I mispronounced your name, but it's been in the family for like 4 or 5 generations. It's my wife's family, and I shared it with the neighbor. And I'll read the text message to you that he sent this morning. Paul, this is the best sauce I have ever.
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah. I mean, it's so anyway, we share an affinity for sauce. Tell us about how you got the name. Tell us about what you guys are doing right now. What's going on with that?
So let's see, the naming something is always a challenge, isn't it?
Right.
Finding something that really exemplifies what you mean and who you are and things like that. So I always used to joke, I got the sauce, and meaning it all sorts of different ways. Sassy sauce, cooking sauce, secret sauce, all the sauce.
Secret sauce, right? All the sauce.
All the sauce. So it is, that's where this all came from.
And so how does that translate to email? Tell me about that.
It translates to email just in that I have a lot of different crazy ideas on how to do things. And it just kind of depends what the brand is, what they're doing, what they're not doing quite often is actually what I look at.
Right.
But sauce is kind of like, if you put sauce on something, it is all encompassing. It's meant to be like overarching across the meal, right?
Right.
You know, blanketing your pasta with your pasta sauce. It is what makes it good and makes it bad. So there you go. There's some sauce. But I also look at everything very holistically. Like if someone's asking me just to look at their email program, I'm going to ask them a whole bunch of questions about all their other marketing too. And they're always like, well, why are you doing that? Because I need to know what's going on. If I don't understand what's happening on other channels and we change this one channel, what is that really going to do? It's not necessarily impacting the entire universe that you could be impacting. So that's what that's about.
Well, that works. Like that.
Yeah.
So let's roll back the clock.
Yes.
That's what you're doing now. Talk about how you got into email marketing. What year did you get your start? What were you doing? Did you blunder into email like some of us did, or did you deliberately make a choice to go into email? Talk about that.
I didn't blunder or deliberately make a choice. I was actually recruited.
Okay.
So in 2006-ish, I was working at Discover Card, and I was one of those late degree fetchers. So I was finishing my degree at DePaul in Chicago, and
good basketball school. Sorry.
Yes, go Blue Demon. And during my finishing my degree, I had made these connections in the marketing department because I had all these things that I had to ask marketing people or people in my profession. And because of that, I got connected in and basically invited to apply to get in the department even before I was graduated. But then I started in the portfolio area. So it was a lot of direct marketing and mail and things like that, the old school stuff.
Yeah.
But very quickly, I was recruited over into the digital side. And then I began just focused completely on email and submerged in it from the get-go, which was super cool. And I met the email team because I was doing some experiments, because at the time, 06, things were still a little fresh.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we did a lot of testing. Is it going to perform better in mail? Is it going to perform better in email? And they were just starting to put more and more money into the e-business, which is now just digital type of areas because of it, because it was cheaper. And then as we approached, of course, the downturn in, what is it? Do they call it a recession now in 2009?
Yeah, it is being called a recession. I remember it maybe all too well.
Downturn forever, refusing to say recession. But as we got there, more and more money was funneled into digital because it was the only place they wanted to push marketing, because it was
on email, digital marketing, all of those things are sort of counter-cyclical, right? When the market goes down, what should you do? Invest in marketing, because that's how you recover.
Exactly. Well, and especially digital marketing. So at the time, you had a lot more potential choices. But now I think the focus is much more on just the digital space. There are still mailers. I still get a whole bunch of junk mail, and then some good mail, which when I get a good piece, I save it because it's random these days. But yeah, I started there and I was recruited in, and I kind of never looked back.
So what was the recession? Chris, I get this follow-up.
No, because your follow-up is too far in the future. My follow-up is still 2006.
Fine.
All right, go for it.
So I'm guessing that, given it was Discover Card, that you were doing a lot of acquisition email as opposed to
before it was even
CRM.
Acquisition email. Yeah, right. Before it was acquisition.
And before it was as frowned upon as it has come to be over the years.
Yes. So there was, back then the list acquisition was robust machine. So there was lots of that going on. I actually ended up working mostly in things like, we had, being a financial institution, a ridiculous amount of notification emails, just a ridiculous. that had to be managed. So there were multiple layers of communications that had to be sorted in a way. And then we had a very strict communication calendar at the time. Before any type of threshold testing was a thing or a question, people got one email a week that was marketing outside of notifications, and that's it.
Right.
So it was a very strict schedule. People could, if it was the same audience, 2 emails could not go out that week. It had,
Right.
but there were emails going out every day that were marketing. It was just, they had to be different audiences.
Yeah.
And so there was a lot of rigid regulation internally about that. But one of the cool things about Discover being my first email gig is they had so much data.
Yeah.
They made me, like, they spoiled me rotten with being able to understand people. And then I started moving into other areas. I'm like, you don't have this? Like, this
You don't
is
know. Right.
yeah. But they had this crazy intense segmentation, and it was like the sheet, and it was all color coded, and depending on which department and area you're focused in, those were the segments that you followed. So when I started in direct mail, I was doing portfolio marketing. So that was current card members and trying to get them to use more. It was the low usage area.
Right.
But it was only trying to encourage certain people of a certain risk factor to use more. So it was the people that were financially stable and very responsible that you were trying to entice to use their card.
Got it.
It was a very interesting dynamic. And then, of course, that switched to me being able to play in all the different segments in email.
Well, sure. One of the things that you brought up, which I thought was really fascinating, I'd like to explore a little bit because we haven't in this season yet, and that's this very young industry of email that had just sort of gotten off the ground. We were just starting to get legs underneath us in terms of what even an email marketer was, if we'd even define it as that, right? Yes. Things were being called spam and sort of trying to legitimize that a little bit. Right. And then the recession hit. And I'm really curious, honestly, both from you, Samantha, and you, Chris, what was the recession like when it hit email marketing? Did you see an uptick on the email on business side? Did you see a cinching of the belts like everyone else kind of felt? What was that like?
For me, there was still, unlike the COVID experience of last year, I would say it's completely opposite. It was just a tighter cinch. There was still, the marketing that went out was digital. So it was web focused, it was media focused, it was email focused, but it was still tightened a lot. And whereas now you could say there was just a dramatic switch to focus a lot more on email in the past year. We had a lot more room to play because they just moved money and reduced, which was good.
Was the same thing true? Chris, was the same thing true for you?
Yeah, I don't recall. That's a good question. I don't recall really feeling any business pain during the recession, 2008, 2009. And I think it's probably, as Samantha said, when you have less money to spend, you focus it on the channels that are less costly and emerging as being more effective. And I think, email probably benefited then as it did last year during the COVID pandemic, as again, a low cost, high touch, high ROI channel. So yeah, I don't really remember clients cutting budgets at all back at that time.
Right. And it's a little more than 10 years apart, COVID and recession. I'm really curious what the parallels are. You know what I mean? Because we found some differences there. Huh.
Yeah, I think well, I do have to caveat my experience at Discover kind of ended at that time. There was a huge layoff. I ended up moving overseas for a little while. So I was out of the game for like a year and then came back in 2010, which proceeded to take forever to find work again too. So it was a really long time in getting back into that game. So there's a space where I don't know.
I think you might be, there is something there that is a big difference in that 2006 recession. There were a lot of layoffs. There were a lot of lost jobs, right? And I think that's one of the big differences, as I'm just kind of chewing on it aloud with you guys. The recession, everyone was out of work. So who are we going to market to, right? Like, hey,
there's that.
Right. And now we're facing those same challenges, even though we can, knowingly on the inside, we're like, we have a solution here that can make this better. Right. It was tough. It was a tough time. And so versus the pandemic. I mean, there were certainly job losses, but not anywhere near.
They were different sectors of the market. So it wasn't like corporations. I mean, there were some, like I got laid off in August. That's kind of where the sauce was born. And I didn't expect to be, but I was, and there were some very large layoffs where I was working. And there were other agencies that have laid off and things like that, but that's usually more directed by clients, right?
Yep.
So when you're in an agency, layoffs usually occur because you have client loss. And that was more the situation, I think. But it was under the COVID umbrella, and therefore it was a COVID layoff. But at the end of it, most people who are out of work were a lot of like service workers. So the people who couldn't physically go to work didn't have a job. And, you know, people like us who could assume a role online very easily, you know, or people that hadn't historically, but could. So I think it proved to a lot of companies that remote is not a bad thing. And, you know, you might miss people, but is the work suffering? I've not heard of any industry saying anywhere that their work has suffered at all as far as being able to collaborate and do the things that you do. So hopefully the people who like working at home or have a need to work at home no longer have that challenge that they used to have. I used to have to fight to let people work from home, because who cares? I don't care where people work as long as they do it, you know? And
well, you don't want your waiter or waitress working from home.
Well, no, exactly. Because that would take a long time to get my sandwich.
Exactly. So,
well, let me have one quick follow-up, Chris, and then I'll hand it off to you. Because I do want to, there's, you know, really, I think an interesting parallel between my journey and Samantha's, and I think it's worth mentioning. I think when you have these sort of inflection points in society, like the pandemic, like that recession in 2006, out of the recession, that's where Audience Point was born, right? I couldn't find a job. I couldn't rub two pennies together to get a nickel, right? Like it was a tough time. And I mean, I remember a story where we were, and I don't love to share this story, but I think it's powerful. We were needing to collect food stamps, EBT, because I'm not going to let my kids not eat. We actually ended up getting food from the food pantry, right? And I remember there being a moment where my wife is just like, "Why are we still doing this? This is so hard." And she's like, we don't even have the money to buy vegetables for our kids. And at that food pantry, there was a lady who came out. She's like, she had fresh vegetables. She's like, "I put these aside this morning because I knew someone would need them, and they're for you." And I was just like, man, it's those moments that kept us going. But it's also out of that sort of era of just turmoil, of just everything going on, is when we started Audience Point, and that's how we've grown it into what we have now. Right. I'm wondering if there is a parallel, and we will see the same thing out of the pandemic, like you, who was like, "I've got to still make a living.
Yes.
Let me start the sauce. It's time. The stove's on, baby."
There's one interesting difference. So back then, there weren't jobs for you and me. There were they didn't exist because all those jobs were laid off. They were literally no existing jobs. Now there's a ridiculous amount. If I told you how many interviews I had, you'd be like, "Are you kidding me?" How many applications, resumes, recruiters, all these conversations in the past 7 months? Ridiculous. Not one. And you know, you've known me for a long time. You know what I've done and the knowledge I have. I'm like, really? Am I that much more expensive? Is that it? Because it's certainly not because of me. I mean, come on.
Right. No. I would agree. I think the world of you. Like when Chris and I were talking about who would we like to get in to talk about sort of with us around the history of email, you absolutely were one of those names. Like, yes, let's have this conversation. And so I would absolutely put you into that category of let's have that. You know, like it is surprising to me that you didn't get more.
It is really surprising. And it's been kind of a hard road to do that because you know, as well as I do, having started a business in a recession, you know, surviving on just that is very difficult because it takes a while to get work.
Yeah.
And, you know, I've had some stuff funnel in that's kept me moving and going and all that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I still would like benefits and a job and get it rolling on the side and get a better position. Because of course, you know, when you start a business out of not having a plan and not having a savings for it and all of that other stuff, you know,
Right.
no umbrella at all.
Right.
So
Right.
there's those things too. But luckily, I've been really lucky. Luckily, being in the industry as long as I have, I know people. And
Right.
somehow you end up having these weird random conversations and, hey, I've got end of year money, or hey, I can do this. And
Yes, you do.
Yeah, you know, when you hear the things like, throw a crazy number out there and tell me if that's too much. And I'm like, okay. And you throw the number out and they're like, oh no, that's totally fine. I'm like, so I should go more. And he's like, yeah.
There's more? Ah.
I said, okay, I can do that.
Right.
So that's a good time. So luckily those kind of things have happened for me to keep me afloat and keep me moving.
Right.
But to your point, that's the only difference I would say is there are a lot of jobs. There's just a whole lot of competition for them. And I think it's always harder. The higher you get up a ladder, the harder it is to find something, and it always takes longer. But this is the longest time since that recession, since 2009 to 2010. It's the longest time I've been unemployed officially and not being able to find work. So
yeah. Well, I'm glad you are getting some come in. Chris, did you have a question? I cut you off earlier, and I'm sorry about that. But thank you.
I have a bunch, but I have a bunch, but I also want to say that given our huge audience, I'm fairly certain some very lucrative offers are going to be coming in after this program airs.
Huge. That's true. I mean, when you talk about the fan base that we have, you're absolutely right. The reach
our reach into the C-suite of the Fortune 1000 is
it's remarkable. It's truly remarkable.
So anyway, going back, I'm gonna keep going back because this is founders. When you're working at Discover, who was your ESP at that time?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Oh yeah, eDialogue.
Ooh, eBay Enterprise.
That's right. But way before eBay.
Right, way before eBay.
It was just eDialogue, and they were becoming pretty large at the time. Yeah.
That was during the period where eDialogue and sort of ExactTarget and Responses were all emerging.
Yes.
From the aftermath of the first consolidation of, Digital Impact getting bought by Axiom and Cheetah getting bought by Experian. So these independents started bubbling up, and which is surprising because I know Discover was a huge data client of probably all of those guys of Epsilon, Experian. I know they were of Axiom, and yet they shunned all of their, the whole goal of Axiom buying Digital Impact was our big clients like Discover will now use our email. And yet you guys were like, no, I don't think we're not going to do that. We're going to
eDialogue.
We're going to go with these guys you've never heard of called eDialogue.
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's interesting about that, and you bring up an interesting topic, because the larger and more layered an organization is, the more, the less control you have over the choices of your products that you're using. Mm-hmm. So someone somewhere who was in control of purchasing an ESP knew someone. And especially back then, you probably got a kickback or some sort of benefit. And that's why we were on eDialogue. And then in risk management, I actually started out in risk management at Discover Card, believe it or not. I was an assistant. I was not like one of those serious data modeler. I mean, it was the smartest department in the entire company. It was ridiculous. Right. Like almost everyone was a PhD and everything. But I learned a lot because, I mean, talk about nerds. You know how much we like nerds. They were like the pinnacle nerd, and I learned a whole bunch of stuff. Well, one of them is, to your point, Axiom, Experian, FICO. We had contracts with all of them for data. Data was coming in from everywhere we could get data because we needed it for all that modeling. Right. So huge data client. Absolutely.
Interesting. And it's also, you had mentioned that you did a lot of transactional emails back then as well, purchase confirmation. And that was sort of before any of we had MK Marsden on in season 2, I think, and talking about how her pioneering role and her company's pioneering role in bringing transactional email into the conventional ESPs. And that's a great episode, folks. If you haven't listened to that, great.
Watch it.
It could have been in the Founders series because she goes back
easily. Well, it could have its own series dedicated to itself, Chris.
It could. But so do you recall, I mean, how those transactional messages were handled? Were they?
It was an internal MTA. that what I'm
Yeah,
thinking?
Yep.
Yeah, you start losing some of those old acronyms after a while.
So they were
I know.
probably just a bunch of plain text emails coming off your ERP back end.
Right.
Right.
So there were, depending on what they were plain text, but we were getting more advanced, and we were having some that went off the ESP
Okay.
Yep.
that were nicer. And so
Sure.
like account summary type things that started getting more complex and more interesting. But yeah, the generic like change your password stuff, that was still the internal MTA. Yeah.
Right.
So that's old school, kids. That's old school. Now all that's coming through in ESP, but back then it was still there were clients, and Paul, you and I have talked about this. There are companies, and there probably still are today, that if you dig deep enough, emails are coming from 4 or 5 different places in the organization and platforms. And but back then it was even it was even more chaotic than even the most chaotic situation today.
Well, and that's interesting that you say that too, because I find that fascinating too. I feel like corporations waste so much money on technology that they don't realize that they're not leveraging across the company, because each division can have like their own product or their own ESP or whatever. And it's like, well, why would you do that? It's just a huge waste of money when you can pull all that data in one place. It's part of that's the whole. I know. I'm just thinking about the data. If you can have access to all of that, because so many companies still have not transformed properly. So many companies have data sets and servers that are completely all disjointed and not connected. And because of that, part of that is because of all this layering of stuff. And
Right.
being a little more thoughtful about that process.
Well, and you're not wrong. I know that I know Microsoft went through that with Azure, where they're sort of creating sort of a central headquarters of it. They call it a data lake. I know Salesforce is going through that with their 360-degree view. I mean, I know it's popular to have that sort of central hub, but I mean, so many things come to mind there, right? Like everything from security, data security. Now you've got it all in one place. Just show up, take anything you want. We pre-packaged it for you. I mean, there's so many risks that come with that. I mean, I love what you're saying.
It's also a burden on the technology. Like you have to prove your sauce in the security realm for me to be able to do that and commit to it. I do agree with you there. And I do believe there's overarching security that could occur regardless of whatever your central hub is. You have to have another umbrella over that. Otherwise it's not going to function properly. But I totally get you. And it's crazy and convoluted, but I don't know if any corporation, the way they function these days, is going to be focused enough to do that. I have a problem with money wasting. I don't like seeing it, because that means it's coming out of my budget. You know, whether it be the company I work for, you're wasting all this money over here when we could be doing all this internally.
I could bill you directly for this instead of you paying someone else. Why?
Exactly. And it would be like at least half the cost, and I'd still be making money. So there you go.
All right. Well, I want to do a little historical for the since this is historical in nature. For those of you at home wondering what happened to eDialog, Paul touched on it. eDialog became very large, very fast, as Samantha said. And they got bought by a company called GSI Commerce. I don't remember the exact year, but it was around 2009 or so.
I think it was 2010.
Okay, 2010. Okay. And GSI Commerce was the largest provider of retail e-commerce websites, hence their name GSI Commerce. And they built commerce websites for lots of major brands. And they provided agency services, and they thought having an email service provider attached to that made a lot of sense. And it did. Sure. And then eBay came in, bought GSI Commerce, and really kind of neglected the whole email aspect of what they bought. And so finally, what was left of eDialog, now called, as Paul, you pointed out, eBay Marketing Services, or Enterprise Marketing Services, eBay Enterprise, got bought by Zeta Global. So now anybody who would whatever technology or people are left from back in the day, they're now working with Zeta Global. So there's a little history for you with what happened to eDialog. So
many acquisitions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's worth looking into or reflecting a little bit on too, because we've seen, and I don't know anyone who's done it really well. I don't know anyone maybe we have. Let's talk about that. So like Exact Target, growing, gets picked up by Salesforce, gets put into the fold.
And wasn't that really like the first like huge acquisition?
Right.
That was the first giant one.
And it kicked off the second wave of it, the whole Marketing Cloud, Adobe,
right.
IBM, Oracle, and Salesforce all jumped in.
So then we have IBM buying Silverpop. We have
Lauren
Oracle
last
buying
week.
Responsys, right? Who else kind of
Adobe bought Neolane.
Yes, yeah. Which was a little bit.
Bought.
Neolane was a little bit different because it was sort of a hybrid model where it was, you had the client on your local machine as a binary app you installed, and then
it was on premise. Yeah. Sort of the counter cloud concept, that was an interesting acquisition.
Yeah. So we've seen a lot of these. Cheetah getting bought by Epsilon, right?
That was first wave. That was wave number one. That's what I call wave number one. Number one, 2004, 2005.
Wasn't it?
Cheetah was by Experian, not Epsilon, right?
Yeah, Epsilon. I worked for Epsilon. They acquired Bigfoot back in the day, so that was long time ago. So Dream was built off of Bigfoot, and they had Dream forever. And then there was also I had actually started working for Aspen Marketing Services in West Chicago. They were acquired 3 months before I started working here by Epsilon. So it was still Aspen for the first couple of years. But during that transition, it was so rough. No one at Epsilon liked Aspen, and no one in Aspen liked Epsilon. So it was this huge, so they never talked to us about email. And we were the reason we were bought was the email area, pretty much.
We may have worked together when you were at Aspen. No, I'm not kidding.
Really?
So what I remember is we were working with a large automotive brand.
Yes.
And Aspen was overseeing that brand as well. And if I remember right, the had misreported engagement or something weird coming back. And I remember Aspen being like, let's punch him.
Yeah. So we were pretty feisty. So Epsilon bought for the email solution for automotive. That was the primary reason. And we had a highly developed and evolved email department, which was not common at that time. So, still my vice president is actually still there. He's a SVP now running the show still.
Cool.
But so that automotive system was highly complex and very, very homegrown, but still it was constantly being nurtured a little bit. And, but it was the only system in existence, I think at the time, if I remember correctly, that could actually functionally do emails to multiple dealerships or for multiple dealerships under an umbrella of a brand. So, Ford or Land Rover, whatever, the dealerships could opt in individually to do whatever marketing they wanted to. I mean, Aspen was a very interesting business story, but we can go into that another time.
No. What I wanted to come back to was, and maybe that's the answer to my question, which was, you said you got laid off from Discover in like 2008, 2009. You went to Europe for a year. You came back and you made a conscious decision, it sounds like, to get back in the email. Where did you land when you came back? Was it Aspen or was there something before Aspen?
No, there was something right before Aspen. It was TransUnion.
Ooh, okay.
So it was financial. That's the only reason I got a job is because I came from Discover Card.
Right.
The only reason I got that job because no one else applied for it with any financial background. So I got lucky.
That's another shop that I would believe probably had a ton of data as well, right?
Oh my goodness, yes. Tons of data. But what I was working for, which was interesting, they had an interactive division. And what that really meant was they were selling one product online, and that was their credit score product. Right. And that credit score product used to be called something else that TransUnion acquired and bought. So I was really, even though I was working for TransUnion, I was working for the people from this other company, basically.
Got it.
So it was a very interesting dynamic, but also it was super boring. Like it was just straight up, I only get to do these emails. I can only change so much stuff.
Right.
So that's when I actually started becoming really active in LinkedIn groups. That's when I joined OI, because Scott Hardegree Started writing for his blog, and he saw me in one of his groups and everything, and he kept asking me to write stuff. So I started writing stuff. Then he invited me to OI, and kind of the rest is history. But that's really, I was so bored. I had so much time on my hands because the work was so minimal that I was just actively researching and learning and talking and just in all those different groups. And it was fun. I had a good time for that. The work was boring, but I learned a lot.
Which I guess is what drove you into the arms of Aspen Marketing Services.
Yes. Yeah. My vice president found me. I think it was because of OI, actually. So I became really active really fast on OI, and he saw me talking and he sent me a note.
Got it.
I interviewed and I got a job there, which was cool.
Okay.
He saved me. And then I had 3 years of probably the hardest work I've ever done in my life, 60 to 75 hour weeks sometimes.
Where was that?
At Aspen.
That was at Aspen. You were putting that kind of.
Yeah, I was kind of thrown in the Epsilon side though a little bit.
Got it.
I'm the new person, so we have to start working with these Epsilon people. Here you go.
Yeah. Well, and that's appealing, right? When you've got this pain looming, and you're like, we've got a new hire. They're starting out brand new. Why don't you just, go handle that?
Yes. Well, and I have a history of being the fixer. So I tend to get thrown in when there's a problem to fix it. And it's just, I don't know, it's something I can do really well. So I did that really well. And then all these strained relationships were no longer strained. And everyone was getting happy and starting to not be so skeptical.
Right. Who doesn't love Samantha? Right?
Precisely. That's exactly it.
Oh, goodness. Well, I also, there's certainly something I'd like to make sure we dedicate a little bit of time to, because one, I think, really neat thing that has happened in our industry, which I don't know is happening in other industries, but it may be, and that's Women of Email, the group that was formed. I know you were a big part of sort of the original sort of inception of that, part of the beginnings of it. I think it has benefited our industry substantially. Everything from inclusion to who's speaking, who's leading. Hopefully that bubbles all the way up to CEOs and all of these fantastic. We want to see more women in those roles. So talk about that. What was that like as you were sort of working? You were at Aspen, Epsilon. You had all of these different roles, but there was an opportunity that came up or a need that surfaced, and you were part of seeing that into a thing. What was that like? What was that? So talk about before. What was it like before Women of Email became a thing?
Well, before Women of Email, pretty much the only network you had in our industry was Only Influencers. Right. And if you've been on Only Influencers, you see pretty much the same voices quite a bit, and you have for a long time. And been in there for like 11 years now, and it has evolved and adapted and changed a little bit. But still, there are some dominant voices. And in Women of Email, what's different is it's not even just that they're all female. It's that I think women sometimes historically have trouble speaking up, especially in a large room of pool of people. And now they don't have to worry about that. They still even apologize sometimes. Like, sorry if this has been asked before. I'm like, so what? Ask it. Who cares?
Right.
Ask whatever you want. Stop apologizing. And we do help people that way too, because I think that's really important. It's a natural inclination to apologize, to be a pleaser, there's some things that are just kind of in our genetic makeup or culturally absorbed through childhood. And depending on your age group too, of course, the younger ones don't have as much of this because they've grown up in a little more of a modern mix. But Generation X and older, we still have to fight a little bit of that stuff. And I think what's interesting is it's just this open space where we can ask anything. It doesn't even have to be about work itself. Like, I want to ask for a promotion or I want to ask for a raise and I don't know how to do this.
Got it.
Talk about it. And people give suggestions. And if you really connect with someone, you have side conversations, all sorts of stuff like that. And I was there at the inception, but I was like 2 tables away. I was actually a member.
What? No one's going to.
I wasn't an official founder.
No, and I get that, and nor is that what I'm saying. but I do think, and one thing, for people listening, Only Influencers is an email industry group, and it started out as sort of an email dialogue where someone would pose a question or make a statement, and then other people would weigh in, and it was a little bit of the golf course that we had in email. That's how business got done, right? And so what would happen is someone would say something, and then everyone else would try and prove their teeth, either by destroying the person that came before them,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Or by being the first one to respond, right? Oh, you're wrong. You're the dumbest person I've ever
Especially
met.
back then. Yes.
Yes. And so I think I was at the event actually where Women of Email was sort of basically, if I remember right,
It was the first OI conference.
Yes. And we looked around and there was like, everyone on stage is a dude. And while that's great, we love dudes, whole nother gender of people we want to see in here, because they have a voice that is super important and honestly dominates our industry because of the
that was the other
ideas and things that they're bringing. So
there's more women in the industry than men, but yet we don't voice it as much naturally. Men have a natural hierarchy that they want to like climb and fight and win the big booty, all that stuff, right? But women are just like, oh, I like doing this and that and that and that, and then, but a lot of stuff because you've been doing it forever,
right?
Yeah, so it's a different approach.
What I think is interesting is one of the things that we've noted on this show before, and we talked about last week, was how people in the email industry help one another, and how there is a culture of helping one another.
Very much.
And I think Women of Email is another great example of that, because
yes, it
the
is.
founding women, Jen Capstraw, you one of the original ones. None of you, I mean, it was founded to give women a greater voice in the industry. None of you needed that help. I mean, everybody knew who you were. Everybody knew who Jen was. But you started it to bring it to help that next generation. And I think, again, that's another outstanding example of how our industry lifts one another up. And whether it's somebody at a competitive company, whether it's another woman, again, I think that runs through the DNA of email marketers in general.
Oh, for sure.
For sure.
Yeah, and I think the competitive aspect is interesting because, often when you pose certain questions, you have to be like, okay, I need someone to talk to me about this product, and you don't want to say why. It could be because it's a pile of poop, and you're having trouble with it. But who has experience? Let me know and contact me, and let's talk about it. Because there is a lot of competition. You don't want to offend someone who does work for a company, and they think their thing's awesome, or they're paid by that company, so they want to support it, of course, because they want to keep working for that company. But there is a little bit of that. You have to be cautious about how you say things. Just, you don't want to, I get a little sensitive about the oversensitivity about offending people, but there is a point where you do have to maintain that professional aspect. So I think it comes down with that competitive thing. Otherwise, it's pretty much, we're very open. And there's actually another women's group that I started, I became a member of last year, called Women of Martech. And it's very similar, but in a different way. Like, they don't have a forum on Facebook, so there's not as much like constant communication, but it's a diverse group of women in a slightly different way, because they have something to do with marketing technology. So they might not be like email strategists, but they may have something to do with email service providers or something that connects to that. So it's really fascinating. And to your point, yes. And I think generally, even on Only Influencers, before all these other female-centric groups came, we are very connected. And, we don't have to know each other that well, or it's not even about a like or dislike. It's like, okay, I know someone is needing some work, so let's see if we can find them some work. And I know someone, you guys talk and figure it out. So lots of those introduction emails happen. Lots of those, hey, I know a guy, or hey, I can help you with this, or whatever maybe. And what I like about that is you can talk about anything in the forum, or email someone directly, so you can have a private conversation. So I mean, it would be fascinating to know how many private conversations really happen outside of the thread, because I think that's where a lot of the business is happening.
The networking, Well, I think I'd be remiss if I didn't sort of pick your brain a little bit around the future. as well, right? And
Okay.
basing that on where we've come from. You've seen, obviously, in the short time we've talked today, you've talked about sort of being brand side, being vendor side. You've
Mhm.
talked about being agency side. You've talked about seeing sort of the OI, sort of the industry groups sort of growing in their value. You've seen the inception of Women of Email, which was a big win for our
Very big.
community. So what if you were to put your future blinders on based on what you've come through, what do you think's next?
Ooh, what do I think's next? You know what I love about things I love about our industry and why I stay in it is because there is always a next. It's always, even if it's not necessarily new, it's different. It's an evolution of something. And I think we'll continue down this path of, I don't know how to phrase that properly. You know, it's like, it's no longer eventually someday won't be about women or men. It's just going to be about who knows the most and who can communicate it the best and who likes to share it. And that day I'm hopeful to see in my lifetime. But as far as the immediate future, I think COVID has forced a lot of people to be more creative.
Yep.
And I've been saying a lot in the past year that people had to become empathetic really quickly in an industry, and I'm not just talking about email, just marketers in general, in an industry that's not naturally empathetic. We're always looking for a piece or some reason or some in to talk to someone, but we had to stop doing that because that's like not what people needed or wanted in a whole country full of people trying to wade through this weirdness. So I think empathy, if we lose touch with that empathetic connection, we're not going to evolve that personalization aspect like we want to. And really at the end of the day, you know, everything needs to evolve in that direction. Because if you're not talking to someone, or if I don't feel like I'm being spoken to and you're completely mistargeting me because you haven't listened to anything I've given you through the data, then why should I work with you? Why should I buy anything from you?
How do we become more personal?
Exactly. And I think it's really, there's so many different nuances. People focus on what they don't have data wise, but it's like, what do you have? You can make inferences, you can learn lots of quick things. Companies like to do surveys, and I always tell them to stop doing that crap because it's bullshit. It's like, no one wants to fill out a survey. I don't even care if it's one question. You might get an answer if it's one question, but seriously, ask them things in their email. Like, hey, if you had to between this and this, click, and you're done. You've just asked a survey.
And that becomes very qualitative, and you get a whole different kind of response. Gets much more personal. Exactly. I am looking at the clock and recognizing we need to get to a little thing we like to call
the lightning round.
The lightning round.
I didn't know about this part. Okay, let's go.
Okay, so in the lightning round, we will give you 5 words. It's word association, and you say the first thing that comes to mind.
This could be real dangerous.
Right away. And but we've made it both harder and easier over the course of our seasons. Harder in that we now have in our minds what we think the answer should be, the word should be. So there's a right and a wrong.
Yes, that is right.
But we also give it a theme, which gives you some clue into how we're thinking. So this week's lightning round theme we're calling it the Arctic Blast edition.
That's appropriate.
Okay. So let's get started. First one, Alberta.
I just thought Canada. Really boring.
Works.
Yeah.
Okay. Second one, blue.
Ice.
Good. Okay. Not what we were looking for. No,
I know it wasn't, but that was the first thing in my head.
No, that's good. A third one, Alaska.
Airlines. And Texas is colder than Alaska the past few days. So.
And a last one, King.
Fat Tuesday. King cakes are everywhere.
Boom! You got fifth. You got number 5.
Okay, what were the other ones? I'm dying to know.
You got number 5, and that kind of wandered off the theme, so it was tricky, but you nailed it. King cake is what we're looking for. Now, Alberta, I expected you to get because being a former Chicagoan, you should remember what they used to refer to as Alberta Clippers.
I was trying to think of something weather, and I knew there was something. Canada just stuck in my head. But
I
yeah,
would say Canada
I know what you're
too.
talking about. The
And
Alberta
before we called them,
Clippers coming in.
yeah,
Yes.
before we called them polar vortexes, we called them Alberta Clippers.
Yep.
And 1, 2, and 3 were all variations of that theme. So number 2, blue, norther is another. Blue norther is another variation of an Alberta Clipper.
Okay, that one I wouldn't have gotten.
I wouldn't have gotten it either.
For Alaska,
I'm kind of a nor'easter, but I'm not a blue northern.
I was looking for Alaska. I was looking for Alaska Blaster, another variation, but one that originates in Alaska. And Paul, I see that skeptical look. Look them up. I'm not making these up. I do not make these up.
I know you're not making them up, and it's just my failure to not actually follow the thing.
No, what I'm saying is that the correct answer for Alaska would be baked, as in baked Alaska, as in a frozen baked dessert that is delicious. And I believe you light on fire, Chris. That is the correct answer to Alaska. That is my.
You have to torch it for the meringue. Yes.
All right, but that doesn't go with the theme, Paul. But we'll let that stand. Barbed wire, because you live in Texas now, I thought you might get this one. There's a saying in Texas, and I'm not making this up. The only thing between the Arctic Circle and Texas is a barbed wire fence.
Huh.
I don't know that one either.
Texas is big. Texas is big. There's lots. Those can be regional phrases too. So I've learned that, like, people. And Dallas is a very interesting place because it's full of different people from all over the place, not necessarily Texans, but also country Texans.
Yeah.
And all these different accents from people from different parts of the state because it's ginormous.
Right. Right.
Yeah. So that one that's fun.
Remember that. I mean, the next time somebody, says, in the next few days, if they say, oh my gosh, it's so cold, you can say, the only thing between the Arctic Circle and Texas is a barbed wire fence. And
I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that when people tell me it's cold, Chris.
That's right.
So Samantha, we would be remiss to not tell our listeners and viewers how to get a hold of you if they want to get the sauce, if you will.
If they want to get the sauce, you can go to my website, which is thesauceexperience.com. That's simple. I want to get it nice and easy.
And there's a contact us link or an email there where they can get a hold of you.
Yep.
Cool.
You'll get me right there right away.
Excellent.
Awesome.
So folks can get a hold of you. Fantastic. Well, thank you for your time today.
Yes, loved having you on.
It's been a pleasure and fun talking sort of days yore. I do think it's really a fun topic, and I think each person kind of brings out a interesting and unique nuance to it. So thank you for bringing yours.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It was
and
fun.
we look forward to seeing you again when conferences are. Well, we'll see you in some virtual ones, but we look forward to seeing you in person when we're all back on the conference circuit.
Sounds great to me.
All right. Thank you very much.
Bye.
And we're back. I couldn't even get the words producer David out of my mouth.
Well, welcome back. What a great show. Samantha was such a great guest. Really appreciate having her on.
And for those of you who are listening to this only, producer David has taken the form of a ferret, I think. Producer David.
I don't know
what is that. Is that a ferret, producer David?
I seem to be a cat, but I can assure you both that I am not a cat. It's me, producer David.
Are you sure? You look like a ferret.
I seem to be having some technical difficulty. I am here.
That's spectacular. Well, and I love that you did this, David, because we had a couple of listeners write in and ask for a producer David ask me anything, where I have a list of questions that have been brought up that our listeners are really, wanting to know the answers from you. So I feel like I believe that you're not a cat. I mean, prepared to continue.
Well, so are we doing the Ask Producer Dave Anything segment?
I think so. I mean, unless you're, absolutely against it, I
No.
have some.
Let's do it. I wish we
come
had
in
theme
from-
music.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could do that in post. So I have
Yeah,
some
or-
questions that came in. Are you open to? Are you good with this, producer David?
Absolutely, if it's what the
Okay.
fans want.
So one watcher, whatever we call them, person wrote, "Your hair is very pretty. What is the secret behind it?"
Oh well, that's very kind. Thank you very much, listener, watcher. Um, uh, it's it's a family recipe, I guess.
Okay.
And, you know, I I was born with it. And then, the occasional shampoo and conditioner is that's the secret recipe, if you must know.
Okay. Cool. If it's okay, Chris, I know you've got some questions there too. I have a follow-up question from one of our
Sure.
listeners. Is
Go ahead.
producer David, when you go on a date, where do you like to go?
I'm a huge fan of Popeyes, and I'm not sure if Popeyes is everywhere in the world, but
Like Popeye's chicken.
Popeyes chicken, yes.
Now, do you like the spicy or the regular Popeye's chicken?
I like to mix it up, if I'm being honest. There's definitely a time and place for spice, but sometimes you stick with the mild and you still go home happy.
Okay. I have another question. Chris, would you like to jump in here edgewise or
Sure. No, I have a question from one of our
Piling up.
listeners. I have a question from one of our listeners. Producer David, sweet or savory?
Por que no los dos? But I guess if I had to choose, savory.
Okay.
Thank you for asking. That's a fantastic question.
Another follow-up, and we're just going to keep these running at you. If you had to listen to a single song on loop for the rest of your life, at least audible, what would it be?
Another fantastic question that I'm totally prepared to answer. The answer would be Mr. Blue Sky by the Electric Light Orchestra. It holds up.
You know,
Okay.
that's interesting because it goes sort of with the theme of the weather that we were just doing with Samantha.
Yeah, that is true. Name a book that you would like, that you will cherish for a lifetime. Another question.
Well, the last book I read, I believe, was Dr. Seuss's One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish.
Right.
In my youth, not much of a reader, but that thing holds up. It's good.
It is good. And I have one more question, Chris. I don't know if you do, but I have one more here.
I have one more that just came in actually in response to the sort of the theme of the lightning round. But I'll let you go first, and then I'll ask the question. Very tough
And
question.
this is a weird one. It's a yes/no question, which I would, it's ask me anything, right? And then we'll do this session, segment whenever we need to, as the questions pile up. But the question is just: have you ever bought a scented eraser?
Not intentionally. That's another fantastic question.
Our listeners never fail. I'll tell you what, the fan club that has sort of built up for producer David is really pretty remarkable. You know what I mean? I don't know why producer David has such a following, but he does. He does.
Well, and to that end, a question again that just came in response to our questions to Samantha. One of our guests asked, producer David, when was the concept or when were actually air masses or fronts discovered? What year were they discovered, and who discovered them?
When were what's discovered?
Air masses.
Air masses or fronts, like cold front, warm front.
Like the Yankee Clipper.
Like the Alberta Clipper. The Yankee Clipper is a baseball player.
Oh, fantastic question that I'm definitely well equipped to answer. Sources of global air masses began with the Bergeron classification is the most widely known and accepted form of air mass classification. And I believe that dates back to, hold on.
I feel like he's reading right now, Marriott. You know what I mean?
I am very present. This is all off the.
Like, you should know the Bergeron air effect. The Tom Bergeron is what the kids are calling it now. Like, you should know the Tom Bergeron was formed in 2002 following his stint with America's Funniest Home Videos.
Well, clearly producer David's not as adept at using Google as one would have guessed. So
Right.
I'll answer for you because, again, we like to be as educational as we are entertaining in our program.
Right.
So producer David and fan who sent the question in, the theory or the discovery of air masses in France occurred in 1919, believe it or not.
Really? So it was not Tom Bergeron.
No, it was Jakob Berknes, who was the son of noted Norwegian meteorologist Wilhelm Berknes.
Wilhelm Bergeron.
Interestingly enough, remember, this is only 1919. This is only 100 years ago. Prior to that
long.
discovery, it was thought that if today was colder than yesterday, the air had simply lost some heat. Or if it turned out to be warmer, that the air got a little heated. But
gained some heat.
But Jakob, did I say that? Yeah, Jakob Berknes
Yeah.
realized that there were masses of colder and warmer air that swept across the globe and bumped into each other, and in the process produced zones of unsettled weather, what we call today thunderstorms or nor'easters or any other sort of violent weather experience.
Right. Well,
So
I'm surprised David didn't know that. Producer David is usually on the cusp of all things weather, so I'm surprised he didn't know that one.
Me too. I mean, if this had been an episode of Stump Producer David,
right?
Then
maybe that'll be a segment, because I know the second you bring that up, people are going to start chatting it over to us and like, hey, I bet I can stump Producer David. But your comment about 100 years, Chris, this is, since moving to Tennessee, the idea that 100 years is not that long has really caught on. Can I tell you the thing that absolutely, when we're talking about only 100 years ago, it feels like a long time because I'm not 100 years old, right? I mean, my kids may think I am, but when we got here and we, going to church, we met folks that, they're old timers. So they're like 75, 80, right? So they're not spring chickens, right? We'd be having conversations that we'd be talking about their sort of grandparents who fought in the Civil War. And I was like, holy smokes, you're talking about like the generation I'm talking to, their grandparents who they spent time with and would tell them stories about these things. Like, it's that fresh. It's, in terms of history, 100 years is not that long. 1919, Chris, you're talking like whatever Tom Bergeron did, I'm sure is pretty epic when it comes to weather. He's building on the shoulders of Jakob and
who else? It also feels like 100 years? The length of this week's episode.
Well, we should cut it then, Chris.
Yeah.
So if you're still listening, thanks for listening. Thanks for being part of the family. Yeah.
Keep those questions coming in, but please mark them either ask Producer David anything or let's stump Producer David, because those are two distinct segments and we don't want to have crossover questions.
And I'm just going to say this, please stop sending me pictures of your car. Like, you know who you are. I don't need more pictures of your car. Different angles, different lights. I get it. You have a nice car.
All right. Well, you heard it there. And if they want to reach out to us, Producer David, how do they do that?
Well, the best way, emailgeekscoffee@gmail.com, I think is totally the way to do it.
There you go.
Yeah, that's the way to do it. And all the socials.
On the Facebook, please, and share the Twitters that we send out. And again, we thank everybody for tuning in this week.
Cheers.
Cheers.